Elara was a widow. That was the first and last thing most people in Silver Creek knew about her. She lived in the small, weathered cabin her husband had built at the edge of town, where the valley floor began its slow, inexorable climb into the granite teeth of the mountains. Her possessions were few. A sturdy workhorse named Slate, a dozen leather-bound journals filled with her husband's precise, angular script, and a conviction that was as solid and unyielding as the mountain itself. Her husband, Liam, had not been a man of idle words. He had been a man of stone and science, of observation and history. He believed the mountains remembered things that men forgot. His journals were not diaries of emotion, but ledgers of truth. They held sketches of forgotten Roman aqueducts, calculations on the load-bearing capacity of dry stone walls, and detailed studies of geological strata. And they held the cycles. Liam had spent a decade charting the history of the region, not from town records, but from the land itself. He read the growth rings of ancient, fallen pines. He measured the depth of silt deposits in the riverbed. He spoke with the oldest families, the ones whose grandparents had been the first to break the soil, and he cross-referenced their oral histories of hard winters with his own scientific data. He found a pattern, a 70-year cycle. Every 70 years, the jet stream would dip, the Pacific currents would shift, and the mountains would gather a winter of mythic violence, a winter that could break a civilization built on the assumption of mildness. The last one had been in 1874. The next one, according to Liam's meticulous calculations, was due. He had died before he could begin the work, a fever taking him swiftly one spring. He left Elara with his knowledge, his plans, and a single, desperate instruction whispered in his final hours. "Build it deep," he had said, his hand cold in hers. "Build it into the north face. Trust the stone. Trust the earth." So, in the spring of 1948, 1 year after his passing, Elara took his journals to the town council. She stood before Mayor Thompson, a man whose confidence was as round and soft as his belly. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for help. She asked only for a permit to build on the worthless northern slope of Miller's Ridge, the side that never saw the sun and was considered useless for grazing or farming. She unrolled Liam's plans on the mayor's polished oak desk. They showed a structure unlike any the town had ever seen. It was not a house that sat upon the land, but one that was set within it. An earth-sheltered dwelling, dug into the hillside, with thick stone walls and a roof of sod and native grasses. It featured a deep, stone-lined cellar for food storage and a clever system of ventilation shafts designed to draw air through a network of underground pipes, warming it with the Earth's geothermal heat before it entered the living space. Mayor Thompson peered at the drawings through his spectacles. He grunted. "A cave," he said, pushing the papers back across the desk. "You want a permit to live in a cave." "It's a design that uses the earth for insulation and protection," Elara explained, her voice even. "Liam's research showed that a great winter is coming. This is the only way to survive it." The mayor leaned back in his leather chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He looked at the 2 other councilmen in the room. "A great winter," he repeated, as if tasting a strange and amusing word. "Ma'am, we have propane. We have electricity brought in from the city. We have a new steel bridge." "This is 1948, not the Dark Ages." He stamped her application anyway, marking it for the useless north slope. "Build your burrow, widow," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But don't come crying to us when the roof leaks." The story spread through Silver Creek like a grass fire. It was told over coffee at the diner, over fences between neighbors, over beers at the saloon. The widow, driven mad by grief, was digging her own grave. Dr. Albright, the town's physician and a man who placed his faith in the sterile science and modern medicine, stopped her on the street one afternoon. "Elara," he began, his voice a careful blend of concern and authority, "I must advise against this course of action. Living in a damp, subterranean dwelling is a recipe for illness, consumption, rheumatism. The humours of the earth are not meant for human lungs." He spoke of ventilation and sunlight as if she were a child who did not understand the basics of health. "The design has a ventilation system superior to any wooden house in this valley," she replied calmly, holding up the journal with the airflow diagrams. "And it will be dry. The stone and earth will draw the moisture away." He simply shook his head, patted her arm, and walked away, a sad look on his face. He had done his duty. He had warned the fool. The most vocal critic was Mr. Abernathy. He was a cattle baron from back east who had bought up the entire sunny southern side of the valley. He had just completed his masterpiece, a sprawling, modern lodge he called the Solarium. It was a monument to progress, with vast, plate-glass windows that faced the sun, a soaring roof held up by exposed steel beams, and a state-of-the-art propane heating system that kept it warm even on the coldest mornings. He saw Elara's project as a personal insult to his vision of the future. "That woman is living in the past," he would bellow at the saloon. "While we are building for tomorrow, she is digging back into the mud. It's an embarrassment." The townspeople, eager to curry favor with the richest man in the valley, took up his sentiment. Her project was given a name: Elara's Folly. Soon it became a verb. If a farmer tried a new crop that failed, or a merchant invested in a foolish scheme, people would shake their heads and say he was digging his own burrow. Elara heard the whispers. She saw the smirks when she went to the general store for supplies. The children would sometimes gather at a safe distance to watch her work, chanting, "The ice widow digs her hole, the ice widow loses her soul." She paid them no mind. She had work to do. The work began on May 1st, 1948. It was brutal, methodical, and solitary. Her only companion was Slate, the big Clydesdale, whose quiet strength was a steady comfort. She did not use dynamite. Liam's journals cautioned against it, warning that it would fracture the very rock she needed for stability. Instead, she used the old ways. She used fire and water. She would build a massive bonfire against the rock face, heating it for hours until it was almost glowing. Then she would douse it with cold water from the creek. The thermal shock would crack the granite, creating fissures. Into these fissures, she hammered dry wooden wedges. Overnight, she would soak the wedges with water. The wood would swell with immense, silent power, and by morning, massive slabs of rock would have split away from the face. It was slow, painstaking work. Day after day, the pile of excavated earth and stone grew. She and Slate, working as one, hauled the debris away on a heavy stone boat. The townspeople saw only a woman and a horse moving dirt. They did not see the meticulous engineering taking shape. They did not see the precise angle of the excavation designed to shed water. They did not see the foundation, dug 6 feet deep to solid bedrock. Summer turned to fall, and the hole in the hillside grew deeper. She began the stonework. Using a system of levers and rollers described in Liam's journals, she moved stones weighing hundreds of pounds into place. There was no mortar. It was dry stone construction, a puzzle of interlocking pieces, each stone carefully chosen and shaped with a hammer and chisel to fit perfectly against its neighbors. The walls rose, thick and solid, 2 feet of solid granite. She left openings for the single, deep-set window on the south-facing front wall and for the heavy oak door. She built the integrated stable for Slate, a small, secure chamber connected to the main living space, so his body heat could help warm the structure. She excavated the cold cellar, a deep, bottle-shaped room at the very back of the dwelling, where the Earth's temperature was a constant, cool 40 degrees. All that summer and into the fall, she preserved food. She filled hundreds of glass jars with beans, corn, and tomatoes from her garden. She smoked fish she caught in the creek. She dried strips of venison. She filled barrels with flour, oats, and salted pork. The town gossips noted the frantic pace of her preservation. "She's stocking up for a siege," they laughed. "Who does she think is coming? The apocalypse?" Winter came, and the work moved indoors. She framed the roof with heavy timbers she had felled and cured herself. She laid down thick planking, then a layer of tarred canvas for waterproofing. Then came the most crucial part. She and Slate spent weeks hauling the excavated earth back up, layering it over the roof, 2 feet deep. Finally, she transplanted sod, thick mats of native grass and wildflowers, creating a living roof that would insulate the home and blend it seamlessly into the hillside. By the spring of 1949, the main structure was complete. From a distance, it was nearly invisible. Just a small, grassy mound on the side of the ridge, with a single door and window. The final project was the ventilation system. This was Liam's genius. She laid a network of terracotta pipes in trenches radiating out from the house, burying them 4 feet deep. One set of pipes would serve as the intake. Air, drawn into the pipes, would travel 100 feet underground. In winter, the 50-degree earth would warm the frigid air before it entered the house. In summer, it would cool the hot air. A second set of pipes, leading to a tall, stone-lined chimney, would draw the stale air out, creating a constant, passive circulation. It was a simple, brilliant system that required no fuel and had no moving parts. Dr. Albright, riding past one day, saw her laying the pipes. He shook his head in pity. "The woman is burying pipes now," he told the mayor. "She's gone completely mad." The work was done by October of 1949. The dwelling was finished. The cellar was full. The woodshed, built into the side of the entrance, was packed with seasoned oak and pine. Elara had done all she could do. Now she watched, and she waited. The first sign came in mid-October. It was the squirrels. Normally they were casual gatherers, but this year they were different. They moved with a frantic, desperate energy, stripping the pine trees bare, their chattering a high, thin sound of panic in the autumn air. They buried caches so large the forest floor was disturbed for yards around. Liam's journal had a specific entry for this. October 12th, 1873. The squirrels are mad this year. Father says it is a sign. They know what is coming in the deep cold. The second sign was the birds. The geese and ducks that normally lingered on Miller's Pond until the first hard frost were gone by the first week of November. They departed not in their usual lazy, scattered V's, but in a single, massive, silent exodus, a dark river in the sky flowing south. They did not circle. They did not call. They simply fled. The third sign was the elk. The great herds that spent the autumn in the high meadows came down into the valley a full month early. They moved through the town's outskirts at night, their forms like grey ghosts, their eyes reflecting the town's lights with a wild, haunted look. They were not seeking forage. They were seeking shelter from the high peaks. The final sign came on November 18th. The air. The day was unnaturally still and quiet. There was no wind, no birdsong. The sky was a strange, bruised yellow. And there was a scent in the air, a faint, metallic tan, like cold steel. The barometric pressure, measured by an old brass instrument Liam had kept, had plunged to a level she had never seen before. Elara stood at the door of her burrow and looked down at the town of Silver Creek. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys. Children's laughter echoed from the schoolyard. Mr. Abernathy's grand lodge gleamed in the strange yellow light, a proud testament to man's dominion over nature. A part of her, a small, human part, wanted to run down there, to scream a warning. But she remembered the mayor's condescending smile. She remembered the doctor's pitying look. She remembered the children's cruel rhymes. They would not listen. They would call her a madwoman, a harbinger of doom. Her warning would only be met with more scorn. So she turned and went inside. She checked the seals on the door and window. She brought the last of the kindling into the small alcove by the hearth. She went to the stable and gave Slate an extra measure of oats, stroking his broad, warm neck. "It is time, old friend," she whispered. She barred the heavy oak door from the inside. The sound of the bolt sliding home was a solid, final sound. The world outside ceased to exist. The storm began not with snow, but with rain. On November 19th, at precisely 4 p.m., a cold rain began to fall. It was not an ordinary rain. It froze the instant it touched any surface. Within an hour, every tree branch, every fence post, every power line was coated in a clear, perfect sheath of ice. It was beautiful at first. The townspeople marveled at the crystal wonderland. Then, as the ice grew thicker, the branches of the old maples on Main Street began to groan under the weight. At 6:15 p.m., the first of the town's power lines, sagging under a half-inch of solid ice, snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. The town was plunged into darkness. Then the wind came. It was not a wind, but a physical blow, a solid wall of moving air that struck the valley from the north. It shrieked through the mountain passes, a sound of fury and despair. The rain turned to sleet, then to a fine, hard snow, driven almost horizontally by the wind. The failure of the town's conventional systems was swift and total. The propane tanks that fueled their modern furnaces began to freeze. Valves locked, lines clogged with frozen vapor. One by one, the houses of Silver Creek grew cold. Pipes froze, then burst, flooding kitchens and basements with water that quickly turned to solid ice. Mr. Abernathy's lodge, the solarium, was the first major casualty. Its magnificent floor-to-ceiling windows, designed for views, not for blizzards, flexed and shuddered in the wind. At 9:42 p.m., the largest window on the north face imploded, shattering into a million pieces. The hurricane-force wind roared into the grand hall, ripping paintings from the walls and sending furniture tumbling. The expensive heating system fought a losing battle against the Arctic blast. Hours later, the sheer weight of the accumulated ice and snow on its broad, gently sloped roof became too much for the modern steel beams. With a terrible groan of tortured metal, the entire roof collapsed, burying the monument to progress under a mountain of its own debris. The town's lifeline, the new steel bridge over the gorge, held for 3 days. The wind, funneled through the gorge, created a harmonic resonance in the steel girders. They began to hum, then to vibrate violently. The immense weight of the ice, combined with the relentless, screaming wind, twisted the massive steel supports as if they were made of rope. On the third day, the bridge tore away from its concrete abutments and plunged into the icy river below, cutting Silver Creek off from the world. Inside her burrow, Elara experienced the storm as a distant rumour. The roar of the wind was a muffled bass hum, the sound of a faraway ocean. The earth and stone around her absorbed the vibrations, leaving the interior in a profound state of calm. The temperature inside, without a fire, held at a steady 55 degrees. She lit a small, efficient fire in the stone hearth, more for cheer than for necessity. The carefully designed flue drew perfectly, sending the smoke out into the blizzard while allowing no drafts to enter. She ate her meals of preserved venison and canned beans. She read Liam's journals by the light of a kerosene lamp. She tended to Slate, who rested peacefully in his stable, warm and secure. She was not surviving. She was living. The storm raged for 12 days. When it finally stopped, the world was silent, buried under 20 feet of snow. The sun came out, shining on a landscape of pure, unbroken white. In Silver Creek, the silence was one of desperation. Food was running out, firewood was scarce, the cold was a relentless, killing presence in every home. Frostbite was rampant. Hope was gone. It was 3 weeks after the storm had ended that the first visitor arrived. Elara heard a faint, desperate scratching at her door. She unbarred it and looked out. A figure, crusted in snow, stumbled forward and collapsed at her feet. She dragged him inside. It was Dr. Albright. His face was a mask of frostbite, his hands wrapped in bloody rags. He was delirious, muttering about frozen pipes and a house as cold as a tomb. Elara did not say a word. She did not say, "I told you so." She simply cut away his frozen boots, treated his frostbitten hands with a salve Liam's journal had described, and wrapped him in warm blankets. She gave him a bowl of hot broth. He wept as he drank it. He had followed the thin, almost invisible wisp of smoke from her chimney, the only sign of life in the entire valley. He was the first, but he was not the last. Wordlessly, he had shown the way. The next day, a procession of the humbled began. A family of 4, the parents carrying 2 small children wrapped in every blanket they owned. The general store owner and his wife, their faces gaunt with hunger. One by one, or in small huddled groups, the people of Silver Creek made the desperate pilgrimage up the hill to Elara's folly. Each time the door opened, each time they were welcomed into the calm, steady warmth. Elara said nothing of their past mockery. She simply took charge. She organized the space, making room for families in every corner. She rationed the food from her cellar, ensuring everyone had a small, life-sustaining meal each day. Her burrow, designed for 1, became a sanctuary for 30. The last to arrive were Mayor Thompson and Mr. Abernathy. The mayor was supporting the rancher, who was pale and shivering, his pride shattered along with the windows of his lodge. They stood at the doorway of the burrow, their heads bowed, their expensive winter coats in tatters. They looked at the woman they had mocked, the woman now keeping their town alive. They could not meet her eyes. "We were wrong," the mayor whispered, his voice cracking. Elara simply nodded and stood aside, letting them enter the warmth. The winter in the burrow was long, but it was not hard. The people, stripped of their pride and their possessions, rediscovered a sense of community. They shared stories. They cared for the sick. They listened as Elara, speaking for the first time about her work, explained the principles in Liam's journals. The wisdom of building with the earth, not against it. The thaw came in late April. The world re-emerged, sodden and broken. When the rescue parties from the outside world finally cleared the roads and reached the valley, they found a scene of devastation. A town in ruins.
But they also found that not a single soul from Silver Creek had been lost. They had all been saved by the madwoman in the hill. In June, a town meeting was held in what was left of the town square. The entire population was there. Mayor Thompson, Dr. Albright, and Mr. Abernathy stood before them.
There were no speeches about rebuilding or progress. There was only a confession. Mayor Thompson spoke first, his voice clear and steady in the summer air. "We were fools," he said. "We were blinded by our own pride. We built with arrogance, and our works were swept away. We mocked the one person who tried to warn us, the one person who had the wisdom to prepare." He turned and looked directly at Elara, who stood at the back of the crowd. "You were right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And we were wrong. Our pride almost destroyed us. We are sorry." Dr. Albright spoke next. "I put my faith in modern science, but I forgot that the oldest science is observation. Elara observed. She listened to the land. I listened only to the assumptions in my textbooks. Her unhealthy home became our hospital and our salvation." Finally, Mr. Abernathy, a man broken and humbled, stepped forward. "I built a monument to wealth and ego," he said quietly. "It was a house of glass, and it shattered, as all such houses must. Elara built a home of stone and earth, a home of wisdom. It endured." When they were finished, a silence fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to Elara. She stepped forward, holding one of Liam's journals. She did not speak of forgiveness. She did not speak of their mockery. She spoke of the future. "Pride is a poor building material," she began, her voice carrying in the quiet air. "It provides no warmth in winter. Survival is not about conquering nature. It is about understanding it. The knowledge is here," she said, holding up the journal. "It has always been here, in the stone, in the trees, in the memory of the earth. We only have to be humble enough to listen." The rebuilding of Silver Creek began the next day, but it was a different kind of building. They did not rebuild the flimsy wooden houses on the valley floor. They followed Elara up to the hillsides. Using Liam's journals as their guide and Elara as their teacher, they began to dig. They built their own burrows, their own earth-sheltered homes, their walls thick with stone, their roofs covered in the living sod. They learned the old ways of preserving food, of reading the signs of the seasons, of living in partnership with the land. The derogatory phrase, "digging a burrow," was reborn. It came to mean an act of great foresight, of quiet, unassailable wisdom. Elara never moved back into the town. She lived out her days in her home on the North Slope. She never remarried. She never sought a position of leadership. But she was the soul of the new Silver Creek. The people called her the teacher. They brought her their plans for their homes for her approval. They brought their children to her to learn the names of the plants and the ways of the animals. She lived for another 40 years, a quiet, solitary sage. She died peacefully in her sleep one spring morning, at the age of 81. The entire town, a town she had single-handedly saved, mourned her passing. They did not bury her in the town cemetery. They laid her to rest on the grassy roof of her own home, as she had requested, returning her to the earth she had understood so well. Over the door of the burrow, which was preserved as a town monument, they placed a simple bronze plaque. It did not list her date of birth or death. It bore a simple inscription, a lesson for all future generations. It read, "She listened to the earth when we listened only to our own pride."
Elara's Folly. The Salvation of Silver Creek.